Have you ever been scrolling online, right, and you stop on one of those articles with a massive headline screaming something like, new study shows this morning routine works for 80% of people?
Oh, yeah, like constantly.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you're reading through all the details, you just can't help but wonder, well, okay, but will it work for me?
It really is like the ultimate question. I mean, we are just bombarded with these massive group statistics and sweeping averages all day long.
Yeah, exactly.
And instinctively, we know that human beings are not just, interchangeable data points sitting on some bell curve.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today's mission is a big one, and it tackles that exact problem. We're unpacking BCBA Foundation's D.4, which focuses on identifying the defining features of single-case experimental designs.
Right, and to put it simply, these designs are the absolute engine of research in applied behavior analysis, or ABA.
The engine, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, they are the specific methods the field uses to prove that an intervention, actually caused a behavior to change.
So whether you're a student pulling your hair out prepping for the BCBA exam, or maybe a clinician wanting to better understand the data you collect every day, or, just an insanely curious learner who wants to know how behavioral science fundamentally works, mastering this topic is your ultimate shortcut.
It really is. It's how we scientifically prove behavior change without ever having to rely on those blurry group averages we were just talking about.
And we're pulling from a really fantastic stack of sources for you today. We've got mock exams, clinical study guides, foundational behavior analytic texts, the works.
It's a dense stack, definitely.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
But we're going to extract the most crucial nuggets so you don't have to wade through it all yourself.
And honestly, the concepts here are incredibly elegant once you see how they connect. But to understand how these single-case designs function, we first have to understand a pretty radical shift in how we view the test subject.
Let's unpack that. Because usually when we picture a scientific study, we imagine, I don't know, 100 people getting an experimental pill and 100 different people getting a placebo.
Exactly.
And then the researchers compare the two groups. But ABA research completely flips that script, right?
Totally flips it. What you're describing with the pill and the placebo, that's a traditional group design. ABA fundamentally relies on what the sources call the ideographic approach.
Ideographic. Okay, that sounds highly technical.
It is a bit of jargon, yeah. But it just means that instead of describing the mathematical averages of large groups of individuals, single-case designs exist to explore how individuals behave.
So we aren't comparing one person to a completely separate placebo group at all.
Not at all. The defining feature of a single-case experimental design is that the individual serves as their own control.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Researchers compare the subject's performance under a new intervention directly to their own previous baseline. The goal is to see how this specific person reacts to this specific change in their environment.
I want to try an analogy here to make this tangible.
Sure, go for it.
It feels a lot like looking at a national average diet plan. So a massive group study might conclude people on this specific meal plan lose 5 pounds on average.
Right, which sounds fantastic on a billboard.
Exactly. But that average hides the messy reality that, maybe some people in the study gained 10 pounds and some people lost 20.
Yes.
The math just mashes all that human variability into a single, clean number. But a single case design, on the other hand, is like tracking your own daily meals and your own daily weight. You want to see exactly what foods cause your specific body to change.
That is a perfect analogy. And it highlights the exact reason behavior analysts prefer this method, because group designs mask variability.
Well, they hide the messy stuff.
Exactly. If the data bounces around like your example where someone gains 10 pounds while someone else loses 20, a group design just averages that variability away.
So what does ABA do when the data bounces around?
In ABA, if the data bounces around, researchers don't average it away, they zoom in. The core assumption is that there is always an environmental cause for that variability.
And the single case design is the tool used to go looking for it.
Spot on.
But,
Yeah.
okay, to find that cause for one specific person, you would need a massive amount of data points on them. I mean, you can't just weigh someone on January 1st, weigh them again on December 31st, and draw a scientific conclusion.
No, you definitely can't. Because you can't rely on just 2 snapshots in time, researchers have to use what the texts call repeated measurement.
Repeated measurement. Got it.
Yeah, or you'll also see this referred to as continuous measurement across phases. In a single case design, researchers are taking data continuously.
Which allows them to observe behavior changes exactly as they happen in real time.
Exactly. Instead of just a before and after photo, you get a dynamic, living movie of the behavior.
So what does this all mean for the actual science? Because if we're only looking at one person and tracking their behavior over time, how do we prove it is rigorous science and not just like a wild coincidence?
What do you mean by coincidence?
Well, for example, say I started wearing a new pair of socks last month, and suddenly I got a promotion at work. The socks obviously didn't cause the promotion, even if the two events happened at the exact same time.
Right, the classic correlation versus causation trap. To avoid that and to prove that an intervention actually caused the behavior change, single case designs rely on the holy trinity of ABA research.
The Holy Trinity. I like the sound of that.
It's a concept called baseline logic.
Let's break down this Holy Trinity. What are the three dimensions of baseline logic?
They are prediction, verification, and replication. These three dimensions are the absolute backbone of every single case design.
Okay, let's take them one by one, starting with prediction.
Sure. First, you establish a steady state baseline. You observe the behavior as it naturally occurs without any intervention. Prediction is the idea that if no changes are made to the environment, you can confidently predict the behavior will continue at this exact same rate.
So if I drink 3 cups of coffee every single morning,
Yeah.
and absolutely nothing in my routine changes, you can safely predict I'm going to drink 3 cups of coffee tomorrow.
Exactly. Then you introduce your intervention. Let's say we implement a new morning routine, and your coffee consumption drops to 0.
Which is a great initial finding.
It is, but we need verification. Verification is showing that the dependent variable you're coffee drinking would not have changed without the independent variable, which is the intervention.
So how do we verify that?
One way to verify this is to take the intervention away and watch the behavior revert back to that predicted baseline level.
Ah, okay. So taking the new routine away and watching me go back to drinking 3 cups proves that it wasn't just some random outside event that caused the initial drop.
Right. But we still aren't entirely finished, though. The final, and arguably most crucial step, is replication.
The autocorrector of science.
Yes. Think of it exactly like that. You take the intervention away, the behavior goes back to baseline, and then you reintroduce the intervention a second time.
And if you get the exact same result, if my coffee drinking drops to 0 again, you've achieved replication.
Precisely. And doing that proves that we have experimental control. You'll see the sources use that specific phrase a lot. Establishing experimental control or a functional relationship.
Meaning we've proved that the independent variable, and only the independent variable, is responsible for the change.
Right. I want to pause here, though, because the texts bring up a fascinating philosophical wrinkle in this logic. It involves a logical fallacy called the affirmation of the consequent.
Oh boy. You were going to have to translate that for me.
Sure. It is a flaw in reasoning that takes a very specific form. If A is true, then B is true. B is true, therefore A must be true.
Okay, I'm tracking, but I need an example.
The study guide uses a great simple one. If it is a cat, it has 4 legs. The animal standing in front of me has 4 legs, therefore it is a cat.
But the animal could be a dog. Or, like, a very small horse. The logic itself is fundamentally broken.
Exactly. Now apply that broken logic to our behavior interventions. If I ignore the child's whining, the whining will stop. The whining stopped, therefore my ignoring it is what caused it to stop.
Wait, I have to push back on this.
Go for it.
Isn't that a wildly flawed way to approach science? I mean, just because the whining stops when we ignore it, how do we know for sure that ignoring it was the actual cause?
Right, there could be other factors.
Exactly. Maybe the kid was just exhausted. Maybe they got distracted by a shiny object across the room. If the underlying logic of the method is a recognized fallacy, how can this possibly be the gold standard of the field?
I love that you're pushing back because it is the exact trap that a lot of less rigorous research falls into. And it's the specific reason why replication is absolutely mandatory in single case designs.
Because doing it once isn't enough.
Right. If we only run the intervention once, we are absolutely victims of that logical fallacy. One instance is a coincidence. The whining stopping once could absolutely be because the child was tired.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture...
Exactly. When we withdraw the treatment, the whining returns. When we implement it a second time, the whining stops again. When we withdraw it, it returns. When we implement it a third time, it stops.
Okay, I see the mechanism now. Because a tired child doesn't perfectly sync up with your alternating intervention schedule 3 or 4 times in a row.
Exactly. Replicating it multiple times over the course of the experiment proves the functional relationship beyond a reasonable doubt. The repetition shatters the logical fallacy entirely.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also raises a massive, glaring issue for me.
Oh, what's that?
Well, verification and replication often require withdrawing a treatment that is actually working.
Yes, they do.
So if I have a client who is doing something dangerous and I find a treatment that stops them, I mean, I do not want to take that treatment away just to prove to a piece of graph paper that I was right.
And this brings us to the crucial intersection of scientific logic and clinical methodology.
The real-world application.
Exactly. The ethical realities of treating humans dictate exactly which type of single-case design we choose to use in the real world.
Let's get into these designs then, because translating all this abstract science into clinical practice is huge. The first one the sources outline is the ABA or ABA reversal design.
Right. The ABA reversal design is essentially what we just described with the coffee and the whining. Baseline, intervention, baseline, intervention.
And from a purely scientific standpoint, it's the gold standard for proving experimental control because the data is incredibly clear.
It is. But, as you just pointed out, the clinical limitations are strict. The sources explicitly state that we would never use a withdrawal or reversal design for dangerous behaviors.
Like severe self-injurious behavior or headbanging.
Exactly. Pulling away a successful intervention just to watch the client start hurting themselves again is completely unethical.
So what do we do instead?
When we need to prove an intervention works, but we can't safely withdraw it, or maybe we just don't have the time to establish a long baseline, we use a multi-element design.
Multi-element design.
Yeah, or you'll also see this called an alternating treatments design.
How does an alternating treatments design get around the need for a reversal?
Instead of long phases of baseline followed by long phases of intervention, a multi-element design rapidly alternates two or more treatments.
Okay, can we look at a clinical example straight from the sources for this?
Sure. Imagine you are evaluating interventions for severe self-injurious behavior. You want to test a sensory integration therapy against a functional communication training program, or FCT.
So instead of trying one for a month, taking it away and trying the other, you just bounce back and forth between them.
Exactly. You might alternate them session by session or even within the exact same day.
Oh, wow. So like one morning session is sensory integration, the afternoon session is FCT.
Right. And because you are rapidly alternating, you don't need a lengthy baseline where the dangerous behavior is occurring unmitigated. You're constantly applying some form of treatment.
But how does that prove anything? If you are just bouncing back and forth, how do you know which one is actually working?
Because you are alternating the treatment so rapidly in the exact same time period, if one therapy consistently yields better results than the other, you can confidently rule out outside factors.
Oh, I see.
Right. If FCT always reduces the behavior and sensory integration doesn't, you know it isn't because the client just had a good week or because they're getting older and maturing.
Because a good week would lower the behavior across the board for both treatments.
Exactly. The rapid alternation isolates the specific treatment as the cause.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting though. What if you have an intervention that you can't rapidly alternate and you also can't withdraw?
Like a learned skill.
Yes. For instance, once you teach a child to read, you can't like unteach them to read to show baseline again. The skill is already learned.
That is the perfect setup for the multiple baseline design. This is an incredibly powerful tool. Let's use the source example of a student who engages in a disruptive hair-chewing behavior. We want to reduce this, and we have baseline data showing it happens across 3 different settings: in the classroom, at lunch, and during recess.
So we have 3 separate baselines running simultaneously for the same student.
Right. And in a multiple baseline design, you never withdraw the treatment. Instead, you stagger the introduction of the treatment across those different settings over time.
Walk me through that staggering process.
First, you implement the intervention only in the classroom. You intentionally keep lunch and recess in baseline.
Oh, so the lunch and recess baselines act as the control to prove the classroom intervention is what's actually working.
Exactly. You verify your prediction because the behavior drops in the classroom, but remains high at lunch and recess. Then a week later, you introduce the intervention at lunch.
And the behavior drops at lunch but remains high at recess.
Yes. Finally, you introduce it at recess.
That is so smart. By staggering it across time and settings, you've proved experimental control without ever having to take the successful treatment away.
It's very elegant. There is one more major design we need to cover, though. The changing criterion design.
Changing criterion. When do we use that one?
This is used when a behavior is already occurring, but you want to increase or decrease the rate of it gradually in a stepwise fashion.
Okay. The sources use the example of a client named Amy getting a token for putting her laundry in the hamper.
Right. First, she only has to do it 2 days a week to earn the token. Once she masters that, the criterion changes.
Now she has to do it 3 days a week to earn the exact same token. Then maybe 5 days?
Exactly. Each time she meets the new criterion, the previous level acts as the baseline for the next step.
And you prove experimental control because her behavior closely conforms to those gradually changing criteria.
Yes.
It's exactly like leveling up in a video game. You start on level 1, and it's pretty easy, so you master the controls. You can't just jump to the final boss.
Right. The game demands level 2 skills before you can advance to level 3.
You have to beat each specific criterion step by step to move forward.
That's a great way to put it. But the sources add a crucial caveat for the changing criterion design. For this design to work, the target behavior must already be in the learner's repertoire.
Meaning they already know how to do the behavior, they just aren't doing it enough, or they're doing it too much.
Exactly. Amy knows how to put laundry in a hamper. We are just changing the frequency of the skill.
Got it.
You cannot use a changing criterion design to teach a completely novel skill. And that strict rule that the skill must already exist is exactly the kind of nuance exam writers love to trap you with.
Speaking of traps, the mock exams in our sources highlight some brutal common pitfalls. Let's save our listeners some heartache and walk through the biggest mistakes people make when interpreting these single-case designs, especially under test pressure.
Yes, let's do that. Pitfall number 1 is confusing the terminology of baseline logic with the terminology of visual analysis. Mock exam question 33 specifically targets this confusion.
Okay, so if an exam question asks you for the dimensions of baseline logic, the answer is prediction, verification, and replication.
Correct. But students constantly mix that up with level, trend, and variability.
Why do they get those mixed up?
Well, it is a vital distinction to make. Baseline logic is the invisible philosophy, the scientific method of predicting, verifying, and replicating to prove a functional relationship.
Okay.
Visual analysis, on the other hand, is the physical geometry of the line on the page. Level refers to how high or low the data points are on the graph.
Right.
Trend is the direction the line is pointing, like an upward or downward slope. And variability is how bouncy or spread out the data points are.
I see. So one is the scientific theory, and the other is just describing the picture of the data itself.
Exactly. Okay, pitfall number 2. This goes back to what we were just discussing about the changing criterion design.
Selecting an inappropriate design for a missing skill.
Yes. The sources present a tricky scenario. A 4th grade student needs to increase her reading fluency. She currently only reads simple words like cat and hat.
Okay, tracking.
The teacher gives her a copy of the first Harry Potter book and wants to use a changing criterion design to gradually increase her words per minute.
Oh no. The exam asks why this is inappropriate.
Ooh, yes. And the answer is that reading at the level of Harry Potter is not currently in the student's repertoire. She only knows cat and hat.
You cannot gradually increase a criterion for a skill she fundamentally doesn't possess yet.
Exactly. You have to match the design to the reality of the learner's current abilities.
All right, what's pitfall number 3?
The pitfall number 3 is about the data you are actually plugging into these designs. It is the danger of over-relying on continuous measurement when discontinuous is needed, or vice versa.
Which leads to measurement artifacts.
Yes, measurement artifacts.
That essentially means your data is lying to you because of how you collected it.
Exactly. The source uses the example of whole interval versus partial interval recording. Let's say you are targeting attending behavior in a classroom, a behavior you want to increase. If you use partial interval recording, you divide the observation time into 10-minute blocks. The rule for partial interval is that you mark a yes if the student attends for even 1 single second of that 10-minute interval.
Wait, really? So if the student looks at the teacher for 2 seconds and then stares at the wall for 9 minutes and 58 seconds, they still get a check mark for that entire block?
Yes. So at the end of the day, your graph shows the student attended for 100% of the intervals. Your intervention looks like a massive success.
But in reality, they only paid attention for a few seconds. It drastically overestimates the behavior.
Exactly. And that invalid data completely compromises your entire single-case design. If your data is an artifact of poor measurement, your verification and replication are just illusions.
Because you haven't proven anything. The numbers themselves are a mirage.
Precisely.
Zooming out to the exam as a whole, if I am sitting there taking this test, What is the ultimate red flag word that should stop me dead in my tracks from choosing a reversal design?
The words are danger or self-injury.
Danger or self-injury.
Yes. Anytime a scenario describes a behavior that causes severe physical harm to the client or to others, you must immediately eliminate any answer choice that involves an ABAB withdrawal or reversal design.
Because of the ethics we talked about earlier.
Exactly. If the question involves severe self-injury, you cannot ethically perform verification or replication by taking away a life-saving treatment just to see if they start hurting themselves again.
You must immediately look for multi-element or multiple baseline as your correct answer.
Yes.
That is a golden rule right there. If it's dangerous, do not reverse. Tie it right back to the fact that verification requires taking the treatment away.
These designs are incredibly powerful tools. They allow us to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that our interventions are changing lives, but they must be wielded responsibly.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's recap the key takeaways for you as you process all this. First, in ABA, individuals serve as their own controls. We don't care about group averages. We care about the person in front of us.
Right.
Second, repeated measurement captures the dynamic, real-time data we need to see behavior change as it happens.
Yes, the living movie.
Exactly. And finally, the holy trinity of prediction, verification, and replication is how we shatter logical fallacies and actually prove that our interventions work.
It is an elegant, rigorous system, and it is the foundation for everything a behavior analyst does in the field.
Be sure to stay tuned for our next deep dive into section D.5, where we are going to put these single case designs head-to-head against traditional group designs to really weigh their respective strengths and weaknesses. It's going to be a fascinating breakdown.
It really is. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought from the source material. It's a concept called philosophic doubt.
Philosophic doubt.
Yes. The texts define a true scientist, a true skeptic, as one who is willing to question any claim to truth, no matter how well established it seems.
Think back to that headline from the beginning of our deep dive. Even if a single case designed perfectly, rigorously proves that a treatment works for you today. Well, does philosophic doubt mean we have to be ready to prove it all over again tomorrow if your environment changes?
Keep questioning your data and keep questioning your assumptions.
Always. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep diving deep, and we'll catch you on the next one.